Hello, everyone. Harry is clearly an easy act to follow, but we'll try. My name is Sumant Kulkarni, and I'm a managing director and senior biotech equity research analyst at Canaccord Genuity. My current coverage is focused on stocks of neuroscience companies. In fact, our franchise was one of the first on Wall Street to focus so significantly or almost exclusively on neurobiopharma. And I keep track of all the events in the neuro space, regardless of whether it's industry driven by private, public, or nonprofits, or research coming out of academia. So I'm very pleased to be co-moderating today's panel on advances in neuropsychiatry. I'd like to extend my thanks to our host, Sachs and Associates, for inviting us, and to my co-moderator, Manuel López-Figueroa, as well as all of our esteemed panelists and everyone that is tuned into this video webcast. Today's topic is very relevant as we are seeing a deepening of mental health issues, which has only been made worse by the pandemic and unfortunate geopolitical events. That said, we're seeing a renewed interest in neuropsychiatry, and several novel approaches are in development. So we remain hopeful that a collective effort will help us tackle these challenging problems that present great unmet need. We'll be keeping this session very interactive, and we'll first start off with a brief introduction from our panelists and then move into what we are sure will be a very lively discussion. If anyone in the audience has any questions, please feel free to use the little chat box in your video window to send us some questions. We'll weave those into the discussion. And with that, I'll hand it off to my co-chair, Manuel, to introduce himself.
Good morning, everybody. And also thank you, Sachs, for the invitation to be the co-chair of this very exciting panel and to share with the panelists today a very exciting topic. Myself, as a scientific liaison of the Pritzker Neuropsychiatric Disorders Research Consortium, we work very hard on having a better understanding of psychiatric disorders and bring new therapies to patients in need. Having said that, 2021 was an exciting year for psychiatry, and as Sumant have said, things have changed. And I think that's the purpose of the panel today is to discuss a number of key topics that have impacted the development of drugs in psychiatry, whether it is from the point of view of COVID, the war in Ukraine, the situation of the market, financing, or the R&D, and discuss aspects related to personalized psychiatry. So we're going to start introducing the panelists, and we're going to ask them to give about 2 to 3 minutes overview of their company and introduce themselves. So let's start with Amit Etkin, who is the founder and CEO of Alto Neuroscience. Amit, please.
Hi, I'm Amit Adkin. Pleasure to join you all. Thank you for inviting me, and really look forward to this conversation. So I'm the CEO of Alto Neuroscience. We're a Bay Area-based biotech that's really focused on precision drug development for a full range of disorders covering psychiatric and certain neurological conditions. The core premise is that, as we all know, all of the drugs we've developed to date have been developed without really any definition using biological tools of the subgroup of patients that's most responsive. That's led to then trial and error prescribing in the clinic. It's led to small effect sizes, and heavily that's led to a lot of failures and the perception that CNS is a very high risk, despite the need, as was highlighted area. And so what we do is we develop our pipeline of drugs targeting 3 core domains: cognition, emotion, and sleep. We have 11 clinical stage assets, of which 3 are currently in phase 2, all of them with a companion diagnostic using tools like EEG, behavioral testing of cognitive and emotional functions, as well as wearables to understand sleep and activity patterns. The core premise of everything we do is that there won't be a drug that will be deployed without a diagnostic to identify which patients respond best to it. And as a consequence, we're aiming to both have a higher probability of success or earlier signal that a drug is to be killed. And then when a drug comes out, it'll have a bigger effect size. And really that's what we see as the trend in the future is the understanding and the really tight operationalization of who we're treating in absence of something like the DSM, giving us the kind of guide that we would need from a clinical perspective, all the while thinking about the scalability, the in-home use of these biomarkers to make sure that access is as easy as possible as we change the nature of the field.
Excellent. Thank you, Amit. Very exciting. Next is going to be Brandon Bnsley, and he's the co-founder and chief science officer at Magnus Medical. Brandon, please.
Thank you so much for inviting me today. I'm also very excited for the discussion. Feel very privileged to be here. So I'm also the Chief Science Officer and co-founder at Magnus Medical. So I actually started my career out in physics and working for a while over in plasma physics, doing some projects with NASA, and really learned to focus all of my problem solving in a really classical engineering perspective. And the reason that's relevant is because over at Magnus, we formed over in Burlingame, California, with the intent of taking the Stanford Accelerated Intelligent Neuromodulation Therapy to market. So the same technology is really, we came up with it by engineering a solution for treating depression based on neural potentiation and the basic neuroscience of neurocircuitry. We ended up with a 5-day treatment. We're looking at really high effect sizes of the co-NSD approaching 1.9, which to us is really something we haven't seen in mental health before. And we think that it's really a result of this new approach of trying to engineer solutions now that we have the neuroscience knowledge base as well as the tools to do that. So far, we've completed 3 clinical trials for severe treatment-resistant depression, and we're currently in our 4th clinical trial. And importantly, I think that a lot of the things I want to talk about today and the things I hope we see in our discussion are thinking about novel ways of approaching mental health, and very excited about that. So thank you again for inviting me.
Excellent. Thank you, Brandon. And by the way, there is no coincidence that the two of you came from Stanford, right? So the next one is David Baker, who is the President and CEO of Vallon Pharmaceuticals. David, good morning, please. You're on mute, David.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect. And we can see you.
Well, good morning, everybody. And thank you again for the invitation. My name is David Baker. I'm the president and CEO of Vallon Pharmaceuticals. Vallon's a clinical stage pharmaceutical company focused on the development of CNS medications. Obviously, our lead program is in ADHD, and we are looking to expand our pipeline more broadly in neuropsychiatry. The company went public last year, and we trade on the NASDAQ under the ticker VLON. Abuse of prescription ADHD medications is a large and growing problem, and with data from the NIH reporting that over 5 million people abuse or misuse prescription stimulants on an annual basis. And this is especially common with the older immediate-release stimulants such as Ritalin and Adderall. What surprises audiences the most is when they learn that about 40% of people who misuse or abuse these products do so by snorting or injecting them. Our lead product, the investigational product, Adair, is currently in development for the treatment of ADHD and narcolepsy. We're leveraging the de-risked 505(b)(2) regulatory pathway, and we specifically designed Adair with a patented abuse deterrent formulation technology to be an improvement over original Adderall. We've successfully completed our definitive bioequivalence study and a proof of concept abuse study in recreational drug users. We recently completed our 2nd human abuse liability study of Adair, and we reported top-line results earlier this week. The study did not meet the primary endpoint due to a lower than expected response from our active comparator. However, the study met all the pharmacodynamic secondary endpoints, and the totality of the data were favorable. Obviously, this was a setback for us, and it reminds us all of the challenges of drug development, particularly in the CNS space, where we often have subjective endpoints. We are in the process of analyzing, and we'll be analyzing the complete data set once we receive that in the coming months, and will likely engage the FDA to determine our path forward for the program. Lastly, our technology serves as an abuse deterrent platform that can be applied to a variety of products with abuse potential. We've already initiated work and completed formulation development on a 2nd clinical candidate, which is an abuse deterrent formulation of Ritalin. And again, I thank the sponsors for the invitation and look forward to participating on the panel today.
Excellent. Thank you, David. And last one is Bhat, who is the founder and president and CEO of Reviva Pharmaceuticals. Lax, please.
Good morning. My name is Bhat. I'm founder and CEO of Reviva Pharmaceuticals. Reviva is a publicly listed company listed on NASDAQ. Our ticker symbol is RVPH. We are a clinical phase stage pharmaceutical company focused on developing newer therapies for CNS respiratory indication. So we use chemical genomics-driven technology platform and proprietary chemistries to develop new therapies. We have currently 2 molecules, in-house discovered molecules in development, RP1208, it's in the preclinical stage for obesity and depression. We call our product as platform therapies because they are targeted for multiple indications. The most advanced product is RP5063. It is also called brilaroxazine. We have completed a large phase 2 study for schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorders. So it was a very successful study based on the primary and then secondary endpoint. The product is very well differentiated compared to approved antipsychotics currently in the market. We are currently running the large global phase 3 study for acute schizophrenia indication. The study is progressing very well. We anticipate giving top-line data sometime mid of next year. We do have other programs in development for CNS indications, as you may all know, very familiar with developing new therapies for CNS indications, especially neuropsychiatry, is quite challenging. As I mentioned, we hope to give top-line data for the phase 3 despite the current geopolitical situation. We hope to give top-line data mid of next year. So thanks again for inviting me here and the opportunity to interact with panel and an audience. Looking forward to.
Thank you, Lex. Again, the 2021 was an amazing year, and 2020 as it relates to CNS and in particular psychiatry. We saw a number of investments, to mention just a few, Neumora, more than $500 million, Alto, public offering in 200 and something millions. At the same time, in the last few months, we have observed significant decline due to whether it is continued COVID, whether it is the war in Ukraine, or whether it is the response to many of those by the public markets. So as we have a combination of public and private companies here, and again, I would like to focus the conversation in psychiatry. I would like to ask the members of the panel, what is their experience right now as it relates to financing, whether it is from the point of view of venture financing, or whether it is from the point of view of how the markets are treating the public companies, and understanding that not everybody are in a situation I can speak. I'm maybe going to start with Amit, if you don't mind just commenting on this topic. And I know that we will select a couple of people for the questions, but Amit, as a private CEO, how is for you?
Yeah, so I think the investors on the call have a better sense than I do in terms of where the markets are and how the XBI has impacted private markets. But I think that at least from my perspective, there's obviously currently a downdraft in the market that we're all familiar with, but there is a lot of excitement around psychiatry, and there is a lot of excitement around neuroscience. I think that goes back to what you were saying in terms of that we've seen the beginning of a shift, and I think that that's palpable amongst investors. I think that there is a sense at this point, that certainly amongst the folks that we've been talking with, that it is time for something different, that there's been sort of a deep freeze period for a while with relatively few companies coming out and just not a lot of either market or product activity. But that times have changed. And for example, the approaches that we're taking to develop biomarkers alongside the drugs all under one roof, really with the idea of operationalizing the patients that we're treating in order to be more effective, what was just raised on the call earlier, the riskiness of CNS, that's about to turn, that we have the tools to do this. And so even though the world, I think, of neuroscience really excited investors is a smaller one than the bigger investor world, certainly within biotech, and obviously we're a sliver of the even larger investment world. It does feel like this is the beginning of a wave in neuroscience. Investors are looking for validation of different approaches, and I think Atai and the psychedelics are part of that as well. There's much more openness. So actually get the perspective that even though we're in a down market, there's a lot of optimism once those validation points come, and people really start piling on.
Yeah. Glad to hear that. David, as a public company, what's your feeling about the situation right now?
Yeah, I mean, look, we've all observed what's happened, really, I would say, over the last 12 to 24 months. I mean, I give us as an example. We were able to go public. I wouldn't say we were the first, during COVID, but at the beginning of COVID, there were some real questions about what that was going to mean. And last year, market conditions were actually quite favorable. We were able to upsize and do our IPO despite being a small company, despite coming out as a micro cap, and things were all good. The situation has clearly changed. I'm glad we're not in the situation we were in last year today, looking to come out and become public. Having said that, thinking about financing, it felt like we were in very good shape with getting a very good receptivity, and frankly had the ability to raise, late last year, earlier this year. But, the market conditions weren't sufficiently satisfactory to us. It didn't seem to make sense. We saw, you have to start to think about when the timing of the situation in Ukraine started to hit the market. But even before that, we saw from the very beginning of this year that, it just wasn't a good environment. So, like Amit, I remain, fairly optimistic. I think it's important for companies not to put themselves in a position where they have to be raising at a particular point in time in a particular quarter. I think it just means that even while we have our ambitions around development, people need to be thoughtful about managing their burn rate so they don't get forced into raising when market conditions aren't good. But I think if people can kind of ride things out over a quarter or two, I'm fairly optimistic about the ability to be able to continue to finance.
Okay, thank you, David. And Lux?
Yep. I echo what David said. I think there is a renewed interest in the investment community as well as big pharma in the recent years, especially in the investment community in the last 12 to 18 months, I believe, compared to 6 to 7 years ago, neuropsychiatry, it was very hard to raise capital. So we were, able to close to $35 million secondary offering a couple of months back with the participation of top-tier healthcare investors. So in the last couple of weeks, in our non-deal roadshows with various institutional as well as retail investors, we are getting a good response from investors. So we remain very optimistic about the near future for raising capital or in general investment opportunities in the neuropsychiatric space.
Thank you. Sumant, do you want to go for the next round and we can exchange?
Sure. So, I echo the thing, there's exciting times here. So we'll go on to some of the advances that we're seeing. To each of these the panelists here, and we'll probably go alphabetical by first name. What are the most exciting products in development you think for neuropsychiatry? And where does this whole personalized psychiatry concept come in? And how soon do you need to start thinking about that? And you can also touch upon non-pharmacological approaches where, if you could touch on all of those very quickly, that would be great.
Yeah, so I guess my first name is at the beginning of the alphabet. Let me maybe start with a middle question, which is when should you start thinking about personalized approaches? I would say 5 years ago. This is something that we certainly ought to have done for a long time. I think we've understood that all of the rest of medicine has moved in this regard, but traditionally we've measured very little in our clinical trials. And not measuring allows, it prevents us rather from making the kind of progress, even in simple ways that I think are very possible in the near term. So, from our perspective, for example, we have 3 drugs in phase 2. All of them are NCEs that are interesting in various ways. One is a completely novel mechanism of action. And the ability then to find biomarkers, of which we already have one for one of those drugs, allows us in the very near term to advance the drug into pivotal trials beginning in the back half of 23. And then we're hoping to get on the market by 25 or 26. And I say that really to illustrate, I think, what is, in my mind, a fairly low-hanging fruit, that if we just start to measure and we bring a lot of the knowledge that we've accumulated, in my case, after spending 10 years on the Stanford faculty doing this kind of work, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit. There's a lot of opportunity in the field to catalyze on a precision approach, given that our approach thus far for decades has had 0 precision. And so I see that as a major delta that will happen really in the near term, as we even just do the basics of operationalizing our disorders. In terms of the areas which I think are most exciting, and this is both from our perspective in terms of the kinds of drugs we develop, but also from the perspective of psychedelics, which have brought a different view on this, it's the central role of neuroplasticity. And there's various ways to attack neuroplasticity, but we've seen, I think, over and over that a big part of therapeutic benefit, either for emotion and mood or cognition, is the ability to drive plastic changes in the brain. There are many types of pharmacological, and Brandon will talk about non-pharmacological interventions to do that. But that's a huge area we have yet as a field to really harness, going really beyond the traditional neurotransmitter approaches. I think we're just seeing the beginning of that.
Brandon?
I really echo what Amit is saying here, and can hopefully provide some complementary perspective. I'll start out taking the question of what's most exciting. I think at the end of the day, a proof that any of these approaches is valid is the creation of treatments that exceed the current industry standard of effect size. Now, right now, if we look at the history of psychiatry, the actual effect size of antidepressant medications really hasn't changed since the original TCAs. And some would even say that some of those medications are more effective, but at least from the bird's eye view, they seem pretty similar. The same can also be said about device intervention, something like transcranial magnetic stimulation. The effects of the treatments in the early days are really about what it is now, over 10 years later from initial FDA clearance. And there's been increases in the sham response rates, changes between clinical trials, but really ultimately we haven't seen those big breakthroughs that should be indicating that we're really onto something, that we can take something tangible out of our biomarkers, out of our new hypotheses of neuroscience, and move that forward. That's why I'm personally biased, obviously, for the technology that I've been working on. But the reason that I became so excited with it, the reason why I went off to found a Series A startup instead of continuing my career at Stanford, was because that we saw that after applying a really rigorous engineering approach to a treatment for depression, that the typical depression treatment effect size is somewhere around a 0.3 on the Cohen scale, and ours multiplies that several fold. We saw a change in the time to effect from what's typical for depression treatment from weeks and months to an average time to remission from depression in just under 3 days. And we don't think it's a coincidence that occurred after applying the knowledge base of really matching the technology that's available to us right now with our understanding of the human brain. And really, I think personalization is really just an extension of that. We can take these hypotheses and apply them to really the general data set of what some of these average signals are from the human brain, or we can follow them to the individual with advances in sensing technology. A lot of what Amit is bringing up, which I really want to echo because it's so meaningful. And ultimately, I believe the best outcomes are going to be continued to have as we match our technology and engineer our technology, not just to the disease state, but to the individual. And as you all know, the heterogeneity within neuropsychiatric illnesses is almost incomprehensible. There's still raging debates about how to even classify neuropsychiatric diseases, whether one individual with a DSM-5 diagnosis has the same disease state as another. And one way of dealing with that is trying to find the center point, trying to find the commonalities between these disease states. But another way of looking at it is to say, well, we have individuals who are suffering. They're suffering due to symptoms of their neuropsychiatric disease, and let's meet each individual as an individual and tailor the treatment to them. So in the device space, we're trying to do just that. So in addition to really trying to commercialize this same technology, which was our initial approach, we also are looking to expand upon it so that we can take the same approach, but on a more personalized basis to continue to get big gains. One of the things that I'm really, really excited about is the application of machine learning principles to this. I know a lot of people hear that. It's almost a buzzword. This person works in machine learning, this person works in artificial intelligence. And I think that's almost unfortunate. I mean, it's something we see in any new exciting technology. The buzzwords comes out, the complexity sort of escapes the educational aspect of most individuals. It's sort of one of those things that just has to happen. But one of the reasons I'm excited about it is because if we look at not just the medical industry, but industry as a whole, that been trying to apply machine learning principles to solve important problems. One of the approaches that's been most successful is combining human heuristics or sort of human-based pattern recognition and intuitions with the actual power of processing data on a large scale with machine learning. And I think especially companies, I think a great example would be Amit and myself, and anyone else with a physician-really founded company where you have all of the intuition and the understanding of the disease through seeing hundreds or thousands of patients and being able to combine that with the machine learning technology. I really see a future for a lot of this where we're working with people who have that experience so that they can really direct these tools to be applied in the most efficient manner and not as a general catch-all.
Thanks. David?
Sure. Let me pick up there and maybe go, slightly different direction. Kind of at a starting point, big macro view. A couple of comments made earlier. I do find, and we have been closely following what's been going on in the psychedelic space. It's very exciting. It's interesting to hear Harry Tracy's comments about it earlier this morning. It's a fascinating area. It's an exciting area. I do think that one of the challenges there is going to be the scalability. Especially with a lot of the approaches that are being suggested. And I think scalability is going to be a theme, with other areas that we're interested in. I do think the area of neurostimulation is another exciting area that it's been around for a while, but hasn't gotten as much attention. Again, it's going to be a matter of, is it scalable? What's going to happen in terms of reimbursement? But those are a couple of areas that are very interesting to us. With, I would just say, just a little bit of caution around how excited we get until we see how scalable and how implementable those are. So I'll leave it at that for now.
Thanks.
Yeah, I agree with the comments of other panelists made, but I do believe, we need to develop some practical approach to develop new therapies for treating psychiatric disorders. If you look at the data, despite having blockbuster drugs, 6 to 7 drugs for schizophrenia, and then a couple of for depression, especially the major diseases like schizophrenia and depression, treatment is incomplete, rather in a lot of what you call unmet needs. So often we focus in development efficacy or effect size in the treatment, but in my opinion, we need to look beyond that. In the sense, what's that mean? So often neuropsychiatric diseases, where mainly schizophrenia, bipolar depression, or even ADHD, they are not single disease like cancer or some other diseases. Rather, they are cluster of couple of symptoms. Say, can we develop a broader or a broad spectrum of pharmacotherapy for these diseases? Possibly it may be difficult or a challenging task. Then the alternate option would be to go for add-on therapies. But if you look at the current pharmacotherapies, blockbuster I'm talking about, still a significant patient population that do not respond to the current treatment, especially in the schizophrenia. 1/3 of the patient population, they do not respond to the current treatment. Around 30 to 50% patient discontinue medication in short-term treatment. Why do these patients discontinue medication despite the blockbuster drugs currently in the market? It is not just efficacy. The patient can't tolerate the current drugs currently in the market. That's the major contributing factors. We need to, because this schizophrenia, in fact, the neuropsychiatric diseases require long-term treatment. So we should focus equally, besides efficacy, the safety profile, tolerability profile. In other words, in a holistic picture, treatment effectiveness, not the efficacy, should be the main focus. So to achieving that one, treatment effectiveness, greater compliance, and then addressing the pharmacoeconomic issues. In other words, overall better outcome besides efficacy, we should equally focus on compliance issue, as well as safety and tolerability that could improve pharmacotherapy. And then in that, as I said, most of these diseases, major diseases, are not single disease. So maybe the alternate option, or the innovative regulatory path that could, lead development of make way path to develop newer therapies, especially the add-on therapies or personalized medicine, could bring new medicines to treat these indications of huge unmet need.
Thanks for all those thoughts. I'll turn it back to Manuel for the next set.
Thank you. So a little bit following up the same line of thought. As in 2021, we saw the approval of a particular drug in Alzheimer's by the FDA, but when it came to reimbursement, obviously there have been a number of challenges. As many of you developing drugs for psychiatry are in a stage where you're either developing novel approaches or drugs that are have other competitors in the market. Can you comment on, how do you foresee not so much the regulatory path, but also, how reimbursement by payers, how do you anticipate the challenges that you're going to be encountering, again, because of the novelty of the approach that you're following? So again, starting with Amit, first one in the line. Please.
Yeah, so as I see it, the way that the payment really works is in part to try to gate access to more expensive drugs, because there's not necessarily been a bigger effect shown for more expensive drugs. They're just more expensive with a very similar effect size. And I think that's what we've seen when you're talking about schizophrenia, depression, really any of these disorders. And so following that argument, if you take a different approach, for example, our approach around identifying a biomarker that leads to a bigger effect size and prescription of the drug to biomarker positive people and not to biomarker negative people, that actually aligns with the interest, obviously, not only of patients and providers, but also of insurers. And I think Lex was sort of alluding to this in the pharmacoeconomic comment earlier, which is that if you're delivering something better, the arguments around reimbursement are different, right? Then you actually have the opportunity, and a more extreme case, to even make a value-based argument to reimbursement. So you can actually get, not only further up in line relative to other branded drugs, but there may be situations where really the patient, the provider, and then along with it, the insurance company, because of the larger effect size, go ahead of trying another generic medication and, having to fail X number of drugs before you go into a branded drug. Our view also is, and David made a comment about scalability, and the importance there is that the access to the biomarkers should be something that's done in the home, outside of the medical workflow. So you don't have to change any of what's happening in the clinic. And ideally, and this is how we've angled all of our biomarkers as scalable biomarkers, really at no or low cost to the patient. And that way, there's not really a role for insurance to get access to the therapy, which is where our revenue comes from, by access to the diagnostic. That is just a net positive for understanding our disorders and understanding who we're treating and why. And so giving us the opportunity to inform patients and providers about the biomarker status of that patient so that we can position the right patients to take the medication and therefore really drive reimbursement in a more value-based context.
I guess, Amit, in your case, the biomarkers that you're using are already approved in a way biomarkers. I mean, you're talking about EEG, right? In some cases, whether when you need to create a companion diagnostic for a particular treatment, which is not EEG, it requires a different skill set, requires a different path to approval. How do you deal with that? Because are you just, like Brandon, and that's going to be my next question, Brandon, are you following that wave where you already have a code, or are you thinking in developing novel biomarkers?
Yeah, so even though EEG, for example, is, the capture of EEG data is on a 510K cleared device, the context of use is not for prediction of drug outcome. And so what we anticipate is really following, and FDA guidance to us has been in exactly this way, the in vitro co-development guidances, which is co-develop a diagnostic, which is a software as a medical device on a data stream that is already understood and may come from a 510K cleared device in parallel with the drug. The CDRH bar is really the bar that it is needing to be met in terms of efficacy of the drug in that defined population. And then with it comes, with a CEDAR drug efficacy threshold, that really provides the clinical validation for the CDRH software as a medical device submission that would come with it. It's really more around showing that the drug works in that population, because validating a piece of software as decoding the right signal to identify those patients, that's much more straightforward, but it's meaningless if you don't show the clinical outcome. So we see the orientation really more towards the threshold needing to be met for any drug, and then the diagnostic comes with it as a co-development.
I would like to have this conversation next year when you're advanced and see how that process is moving along. I'm very excited about that. And Brandon, in your case, you have a combination of TMS together with the neuromapping. Again, two different codes. What are the challenges that you foresee moving forward with particular reimbursement or regulatory?
Yeah, it's a good question, and surprisingly, so far, I've been having a lot of fun with the reimbursement topic. Perhaps because it's been something that's very challenging and very complex. But one of the reasons I think ultimately it can be something that is sort of a fun challenge is that there's really a sort of a happy sort of solution space where the reimbursement hopefully can work for all the parties involved, whether it be the sponsor, the payers themselves, the patients, the clinics, and the hospitals that are treating them. So looking at this problem, I look at it as finding that solution space. And historically, in some of my research, I've seen a lot of interesting reimbursement breakthroughs that come out of economic analyses. And one of the things I mentioned is I spent all of my PhD years and many years after looking at economic analyses of neural behaviors, but also sort of applying some of these cost threshold principles to reimbursement models. And one of the things that we see is that if we set our sort of horizon, whether it's at a extremely short term of a few weeks, a few months, or a few years, we come up with really, really different solutions. So I think it's exposing the results of those solutions to the parties that are the stakeholders to help come up with a spot that I think works for everyone. And a more realistic example would be trying to make the decision between a very, very expensive therapy that maybe has a really, really high likelihood of efficacy, and being something that the patient accepts and has a lot of side effect profiles, versus starting out with something that may be cheaper, but also be plagued by low efficacy rates, everything that goes along with having a continuous disease, and all the outcomes of that disease process. So one of the questions actually I saw in the chat was about what percent of the market's actually accessible to that. I think that's going to be dynamic. I think it's going to change over time, depending on the payer situation and how long people are with particular payers, when the payers would be able to realize those cost thresholds and the payback from investing in a treatment that's potentially going to be a lot more effective, and bring wellness to the participants and our patients, instead of sort of allowing them to continue to be in this process of illness.
Cool. Sumant, do you want to? I have a follow-up question for David, but do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, sure. So I'll just go to the clinical trial pathways here, because we know that neuropsychiatric clinical trials can be pretty challenging on a relative basis compared to some other therapeutic indications. So how do each of you plan to address this, and what point do biomarkers come in? At what point do you get the regulatory bodies to understand all the stuff that's going on from that point of view? And what could make life easier from a clinical trial perspective, I guess, is the real question. Probably start backwards this time. We'll start with Lax and then backwards.
Sure. Yeah. The product differentiation is very critical in neuropsychiatry, because especially for our development strategy, it's very critical. We take it very seriously. In the clinical trial, we early on implemented some of the differentiation factors, especially the biomarker evaluation with the current findings, such as inflammatory markers in the neuropsychiatric diseases. So we are evaluating in the clinical trial in the phase 3 we implemented. And then also the quality of life is very critical. It's not just a trial, just a primary endpoint or secondary endpoint standard. So we have implemented a couple of biomarkers evaluating quality of life. And then also some of the side effects profile that relates to pharmacoeconomic issues we are evaluating in connection with the biomarkers. So we hope to differentiate the product not on just a primary or secondary endpoint, various other factors in that clinical trial we can address. So we have implemented those, especially, as I mentioned at the beginning, the side effects and then compliance. These are also very critical points, could significantly differentiate a product besides primary efficacy or secondary efficacy endpoints.
David?
Yeah, if I speak to our situation, we are, not in a situation where biomarkers in ADHD which have been our lead programs, have really played a role. When it comes to clinical trial design and what you would do, you have some interesting situations. You may be in a novel area where you're blazing a trail and no one's really done this before, or you may be in a situation where there has been a pathway that's already been established by the FDA or other regulatory bodies. That was our case. But it's interesting because in developing our trials, we kind of didn't challenge the status quo because the FDA had kind of set the bar in terms of what they wanted to see in those trials, and we were successful in kind of leaping over that bar in our proof of concept study. But I have to tell you that there are going to be situations, as we're facing, where you're going to have to go to the FDA and ask them to take a look at the totality of the data and actually consider alternative endpoints. And I think the key is to be able to have discussions with the agency early on, and frankly, to plan for it, as opposed to either just going straight ahead with a trial design without their input, or submitting your protocol and just assuming that it's just going to be a quick review on their part. I think you need to be prepared for discussions. If I can speak to our experience of running our last trial, we had quite extensive discussions with the agency back and forth in review of our trial design and our statistical analysis plan, and that was despite the fact that we were following a guidance that they had previously developed with other abuse deterrent products. So I guess my advice for any small companies would be, be prepared, allow the time necessary in designing those clinical trials to be able to reach out to the agency and try and get their input, and just recognize that while we're all eager, once we get our funding, to go racing into our trials, that it's going to benefit us to be able to have those discussions up front and to allow the necessary time for that.
Good, Brandon, Amit, and if you guys can also quickly weave in how this pandemic environment is affecting clinical trials, how you might be able to incorporate virtual patient visits, all those things would be great. Thanks.
And if you want, I can just pick up on that because we experienced that firsthand. I mean, we were, we did not experience some of the difficulties that the extremes that I think other folks did, but we had a clinical trial that that began late in 2020. And then really ended up having an impact on our ability to continue to execute. And frankly, we just had to allow more time for our trial. Ultimately, we were able to overcome it, but everything from recruiting to the subject databases that our CRO was using to recruit, it was all impacted. And I think again, the lesson is that I guess you almost hope for the best, but plan for the worst. Ultimately, it cost us about a quarter versus our original plan in terms of enrolling, but we were able to overcome that. So that's our experience that I can speak to.
So I think we have only less than 2 minutes. So Sumant, what do you think about asking each of them for the last comments on whether there are challenges that they see in less than 20 seconds each?
Yeah, sure. Challenges and also less than 20 seconds each. What do you think is the coolest thing that's going to happen in the next couple of years other than what you are working on?
Amit, 20 seconds.
Yeah, so hard to answer both, but I'd say, and this speaks to one of the comments in the chat, that the decentralization, the virtualization of care in psychiatry really brings in the opportunity to leverage technology in many different ways, whether it's assessment, biomarkers, outcomes, delivery of treatment. And I think if we really lean into that, that accelerates our clinical trials. We're doing that ourselves, a lot of decentralized work, and that ultimately benefits patients in a wide way.
Brandon?
I think the thing I'm actually, it's actually kind of funny to say, but the thing I'm most excited about for the future of neuropsychiatry is regulatory process. And the reason I say that is because I think as our solutions become more personalized, in that future, the FDA has never seen patient A or patient B before. Therefore, they've never seen that exact treatment before. And really coming up with solutions that are dynamic, the solutions that change for every single person and can't really be defined as something that's static and set in time. And we've seen changes and I can go through the numerous guidance of 2019 to 2021 that the FDA has been putting out to show that they really understand this, and they're trying to come up with solutions that allow for dynamic treatments, which I'm really excited about.
I think we ran out of time. So I just want to say thank you, everybody. Sorry, David and Lax. But thank you, everybody, for a very exciting panel. And Sumant, I don't know if you want to add anything.
That's it. Just my thanks to everyone tuned in as well.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Hope to see you all in person soon.
Thank you.